we know now, for example, that black economic empowerment is in fact not to the benefit of black people in general, not at all, because it's really an unsavory ideology now. It is something that should be put under the spotlight, should be criticized, and eventually should be done away with, because we now have a history of 30 years or so, and it is a major failure to the detriment of the majority of the South African population, covering a variety of communities, not only Afrikaners, not only white people, but also the majority of black people. The existing dispensation is under extreme pressure. It cannot last. It's on its way out. For the majority of people, it's not rights, it's wishes, and eventually wishful thinking, because in many, many cases it does not materialize. Has our health system improved? Has electricity supply improved through Eskom? Has water supply improved? Has the protection of people against violent crime improved? And so I can continue. The answer is no. Why not? Because the centralized government has failed.
Professor Koos Malan, welcome back. Good to have you back in the studio with us.
Thank you very much, Ernst. It's indeed pleasant to be back with you.
So just for the sake of the viewers, to catch up where we are, we are doing this as the final discussion of a 3-part series. The previous 2 we recorded on an earlier day, and you can correct me, but I'll just sort of set the table and then we can take it from there. The first part was predominantly a discussion about the justice system in South Africa. You could say the failure of the justice system, but it's perhaps better to describe it as the capturing of the justice system, or perhaps more accurate to say just making sense of the justice system or understanding the justice system, and the extent to which the justice system has become a problem to a lot of people ideologically. The second part of the conversation was also obviously from a legal perspective, but it had more to do with how the South African Constitution has already changed through a variety of ways, but one was through different interpretation of the text. And this is largely based on your book, There Is No Supreme Constitution, in which you also make the point that a constitution is not just a written document. A constitution is the reality, how things are organized, which is very relevant for us when we talk about a constitutional dispensation. It's not just the document, it's the arrangements on ground level, and how things have changed over time from 1996 when the Constitution was adopted and how it was interpreted back then to how the Constitution is interpreted today. And then this final part is more aimed at, it's the more important part of the discussion. It's more aimed at where are we now? We have discussed that a bit, but how do we move forward? And I also suspect that there will be an optimistic undertone to this conversation because, and I think it's important to say from the get-go, because a lot of people are very concerned about South Africa and about the future of South Africa. And from your articles and the conversations we have, I've noticed that you are not as pessimistic as a lot of people are, partly because you believe that, and I think we'll discuss this today, that we need to understand what is happening and what could happen. And if you understand these developments in a particular context, there's actually room for optimism. So maybe that's sort of just to set the table, and then you can add to that.
Yeah, I think that is 95% correct. Perhaps I might just add one thing, perhaps a little change as far as the terminology is concerned that you've used. I think it's not only a description of the justice system, but of the constitutional system generally, of which the justice system obviously forms part. And then there's actually just one other point that I have to add. Not that that was that much spoken about during the first two conversations, but most definitely that also is at the background what we will be discussing today, and and that is the question of that the Constitution changes not only through interpretation by the courts, and also not only through amendment of the text of the Constitution, but it simply changes as a result of people acting differently on a consistent basis, or failing to act, and also doing so consistently. And there are a number of such failures and such changes of the Constitution that has taken place. Possibly the most important is it might have been latent back in 1996, back in the year 2000 or so, that transformationism, which we spoke about during the first two conversations, might have been something like a foundational value of the Constitution. But since 1996, incrementally, it has indeed become that. It is now a foundational value of the Constitution, of the constitutional order, and not a very good one. I might even say, before you actually field your first question, and that is that we are right now in the midst of a changing narrative, a changing discourse. Previously, up to a few years ago, you could not have questioned the question of transformation, the value of transformation. And it's completely different now. We know now, for example, that black economic empowerment, or to call it by its full name, BBBEE, broad-based black economic empowerment, which is a central element of transformation, or transformationism, as I call it, is in fact not to the benefit of black people in general, not at all. As a result of which, and I think it's important to emphasize it right at the beginning, as a result of which black people, most black people, are actually finding themselves in a similar predicament than white people and Afrikaner people like me and you, many of the listeners, are finding ourselves. As a result of which there are many commonalities between the normal Afrikaner and the black person. We are faced by a similar plight, all as a result of the failure of transformationism and also the failure of BBBEE. As a result of which, to my mind, at this stage, transformation is something that should crucially be put into, be questioned, because it's really an unsavory ideology now. It is something that should be put under the spotlight, should be criticized, and eventually should be done away with. Because we now have a history of 30 years or so, during which it has clearly protruded that it was in fact a major failure, and it is a major failure, to the detriment of the majority of the South African population, covering a variety of communities, not only Afrikaners, not only white people, but also the majority of black people.
So this is interesting also, because there's this very important, some people have called it a semantic fraud, because these ideas and terms they are described in very flowery language. And so currently there's this debate about employment equity, or in Afrikaans, billike indiensneming. It's just fairness in the workplace. And then the term black empowerment is about empowering black people. So if you're against that, then the argument is, so you're actually against the empowerment of black people. And affirmative action means, in Afrikaans it's words, it's regstellende aksie, or corrective action. So it's all these flowery terms about how society is becoming better, transforming from a bad society into a good society, when the reality is the inverse thereof. And I saw now as we're recording this, there's this debate now also again about employment equity, and the relevant minister in the cabinet just a few days ago was openly shocked about the fact that there are still people, she says still, but it's actually a growing number of people who are against transformation. And she then presents it as a moral argument that obviously transformation is a good thing, and if you're against that, what you're effectively doing is you want to take us back to the past, or you want a worse society when we actually want a better society. So it might be useful to talk also about this terminology that is used in presenting these terms, like representativity. It sounds good. We need to represent people and so forth. But yeah, I'd love to hear your view on that.
Yeah. Ernst, it's indeed necessary to express a view on that, and I think you're spot on as far as the fraudulent terms are concerned, which are in fact used, and of which the African National Congress leadership is actually the real guilty party. And they have to be the guilty party because they have more and more to defend. It is quite obvious to the South African citizenry broadly that we haven't moved to a better society. Perhaps after 1994, in the first number of years, perhaps during the Mbeki government, there were some changes for the good. South Africa at that stage encountered good growth for a number of years, the year 2002 up to 2004, 2005. But then it was over. Then transformation started to show what it really was and what it really still is. As a result of which it becomes just more and more difficult for somebody like the Labour Minister, the Minister of Employment. Can you believe that? That in itself is a misrepresentation, because she is not administering employment, she is administering unemployment. This is exactly what is happening. It might sound at first glance that I'm saying something which is sarcastic, but no, that is not so. I'm just casting light, which is actually well known to everybody, to how reality looks like as far as employment is concerned. Now, it's absolutely true. I think that what we should be doing is to really call into question this fraudulent terms, which in the final analysis is actually only protecting a small enriched elite. The more correct way to describe it as a small enriched oligarchy.
Yes.
Which has come about within the leadership of the African National Congress, surrounded by a number of people in the private sector, who are closely linked with the ANC, closely linked with the leadership. They are the ones who benefit. But nobody else is benefiting, not at all. And I think that is perhaps one of the main things that we have to focus upon in the first number of years ahead.
Yes.
One very important reason why this false terms, these fraudulent terms are in fact used is this. By and large, and if you speak to people, you know that better than I do. If you speak with people from the United States or Britain or so, they might assume that the person-to-person relations in South Africa are extremely bad. And this is not the experience of any one of us. Okay, the interracial relations, the intercommunal relations in South Africa are actually quite good. So in other words, the basis for good cooperation is in fact there. And this is something that this government, thinking in very racist terms, or then at least racial terms, and also thinking in Marxist terms still, this is something that they fear, because they feed on the possibility and the actuality of intercommunal strife and intercommunal struggle. And if that is not if that is not there, if that is not part of social reality, the African National Congress is actually in trouble. One of the things that they should fear, and is in fact fearing, is precisely good cooperation among the broad citizenry in South Africa, which is there, and which, by the way, is something that one should further cultivate, because that is the way in which a better South Africa, a better South African region will eventually be made. And I think that is perhaps one of the main things that I would like to emphasize in the present discussion that we're having here.
So that's, I think, the most important point. Let's talk about this, because I mentioned that I foresee that it will be, in a certain sense, an optimistic conversation. And we have spoken quite a bit about sort of analyzing the problem. But then the question is, to what extent, and this is a broad question, and I know there's much to say, but we can sort of find our way through the conversation. To what extent can we say that a different, better constitutional arrangement for South Africa is possible? And what would that look like? And what could be done to promote that?
Yeah. Ernst, as you've correctly pointed out, that is indeed a huge question which can preoccupy the two of us till tomorrow morning. At the same time, we're not going to write the Constitution, okay? But we can speak about principles, and one can speak about the foundations of what something new and something better should be, should in fact look like.
Yes.
And we've reached that point now. I mean, on the one hand, you can say, well, the basic constitutional architecture, both of the Constitution as well as of the way in which the Constitution has been interpreted, as well as the way in which it has changed for the worse, and also already a little bit, and I'm going to focus upon that, change for the better. To what extent can the present constitutional order be taken as the groundwork for something better? My point is, and I think many people will agree with that, because that is in step with our experience, that the existing dispensation is under extreme pressure. It cannot last. It's on its way out. Firstly, a constitutional system which is built upon the idea of centralization. We spoke about that previously. On the idea of centralization is simply not feasible anymore. For a variety of reasons, but let me mention two. I say firstly feasible. Well, feasible is about workability. Does it work? Well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it excludes communities. It excludes self-determination of communities. And when I use the word self-determination now here, I'm not speaking of self-determination in terms of some constitutional law principle. I speak of self-determination in the way in which adult people should be experiencing and should be exercising self-determination. Adult people do not want other people to decide for them on their private affairs. They want to decide themselves, all of us. Okay? This applies to everybody. It applies to Afrikaners, and it applies to black people, it applies to everybody. So you don't want to have a big brother, especially a failing big brother, a fraudulent big brother, a stealing big brother, which we have experienced in the past decades. We don't want such a person to look over your shoulder and actually prescribe to you, and in that way actually acting in such a way as to denying your basic dignity, in that your ability to decide yourself in terms of the fundamental principles of self-determination. You don't want that. You don't want that kind of exercising of centralized power. So that is something which is in principle wrong. And secondly, it is something that has proven to be completely unfeasible in South Africa. It doesn't work.
Yep.
So we should attend to, we should invest our energies into a better order, or a better multiple order, I should say. And it will become clear what I mean by that in the next couple of sentences. Multiple order, which simply does away with this centralization that we currently have. Before I come to the multiple orders, surely, secondly, we have experienced now that the basic individualistic idea, some people will call it a liberal idea. I stay away a little bit from calling something liberal, because it is a term that is so overused that we don't know what it means anymore. But the Constitution basically works with only two things, only two entities: the centralized power structure, and secondly, the individual. Now, that is actually a fundamental problem, because an individual who lacks the support of an immediate community, a neighborhood, a family, friends, a cultural community, or whatever other community it might be, such an individual is in a very precarious position, especially in terms of a constitutional dispensation that recognizes only the individual and the state, which is exactly the main problem of this constitutional system, this malfunctioning constitutional system that we have. Because you have individuals, and we are saying that these individuals, all individuals, are actually empowered by what? By the splendid, full-fledged catalogue of constitutional rights that we have. That you must enforce against what and whom? This malfunctioning government. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So eventually it's for many, many people, for the majority of people, it's not rights, it's wishes. And eventually wishful thinking, because in many, many cases it does not materialize. Has our health system improved? Has electricity supply improved through Eskom? Has water supply improved? Has the protection of people against violent crime improved? And so I can continue. The answer is no. Why not? Because the centralized government has failed. So let's then get this centralized government over and done with and say, well, what we should be opting for, and that I think is one of the bases of a better constitutional order than the multiple constitutional orders that I've referred to. Let's draw upon our communities. Let's draw upon our communities. There's a tremendous amount of abilities, a tremendous amount of influence, of power, of authority, of resourcefulness in our large variety of communities. All those that I've mentioned, the power and the resourcefulness, the energies, simply have to be utilized, simply have to be mobilized so as to strengthen those communities and to mobilize specifically within organizations, within structures that seek to develop more and more what I've referred to in the previous discussion as tools of government,
Yes.
which this government simply does not have. They want to have it because they are centralized and because they are semi-Marxist and because they are totalitarian, or they wish to be that, but they can't be that. They've proven themselves simply not to have the people and not to have the abilities.
Yes.
So let the communities then take over that. That is what we should be doing. And my point is that new? No. What has been happening is that the citizenry of South Africa have to a large extent already accepted that government has failed, has already accepted that the promises of constitutional provisions, have failed. Nothing or much less than was promised has actually come about. So in law of contract, one of the forms of breach of contract is one of the contracting parties simply repudiate its or his or her contractual obligations. Well, and then if you want to get out of the contract, you simply say, well, I now accept the repudiation. I cancel the contract. There might be damages followed, but then I move on. This is, by and large, the kind of situation that we are now in. It was said that we're also in a kind of a social contract that we have entered into 31 years ago. Well, one of the parties, the government, has to a considerable extent repudiated their contractual obligations. You can now say, no, let's work to get a new government, and I'm in favor of voting. It's fine, vote. And if we get a new government, perhaps the government will do a little bit better. But the fundamentals are actually wrong. The main thing to do is let's accept the breach of contract, the repudiation that has taken place, and let's move on. Let's move on through our communities. Look what has happened. I should say who our communities are. I should first say a word about that. Who are the communities? The Afrikaner cultural community is one such community, and is perhaps far advanced, further than other communities. Why? Because Afrikaners have experienced themselves as the stepchildren of the present dispensation, at the receiving end of BEE, Black Economic Empowerment, affirmative action, legislation, and all other kinds of action that was taken, which are to the detriment of Afrikaners. Yes, and precisely for that reason, Afrikaners have started organizing themselves and has created the form of informal self-determination through the various communities. The Solidarity Movement is one such major example, actually, and a very successful example. But it happens in all communities. And it also happens through each and every organization of civil society, which are simply accepting that if something is to be done, if rights and interests are to be looked after, are to be catered for, are to be protected, they must do it themselves. And they accept, actually, that government has repudiated their obligations. And they accepted, well, okay, let's push government aside. Because apparently, since they are not capable of discharging their responsibilities, why trying to force them? Okay, you can go to court, and from time to time you'll be successful. But let's just accept the situation, and let's accept the self-determination that should be vesting in honorable people who are serious about their own dignity, both as individuals as well as communities. But private business has done the same. Individuals have done the same. Many black communities in the townships, mainly black communities, have over the ages done the same. Do you think there's it's a rhetorical question, it's not put to you, but do you think there's any effective police presence in Mamelodi, in Pretoria, near Pretoria, in Tshwane, or in all the other communities? The police are there from time to time, yes, but mainly the communities there, I have a little bit experience of that. The communities there are actually taking responsibility for their own safety. And they do so not necessarily in a way which is just jungle justice. They do so in a proper way. They are well organized. Okay? So, in other words, even though what Afrikaners have been doing for the past 20 years and more and more so, even though that has been well publicized, this is something which has been happening in South Africa broadly, generally. So in that sense, we are in the same situation, and in that sense, we are actually already, all of us, some much more than others, but we are already in a process of accepting the conclusion, the established fact that to an essential degree, the present constitutional order has failed. And we've also decided to a large extent, even though we haven't formulated possibly in that way, that we have to move on and we have to create through a process of active civic action, active business action, our own self-governing communities, which at first will be very informal, but in time, as they grow more potent, stronger, will be more formal and will form the basis of what I call, or what one might be able to call generally, a better South Africa, beyond what it appears now to be the myth, the fiction of the wonderful, the bridge to the wonderful post-1994 dispensation, because eventually it simply evaporated. So, in a nutshell, then, the basic founding basis of such a new multiple constitutional order lie in the resourcefulness and the building of increasing amount of self-determination, self-management, self-governance by all our various communities. And then I should just add, in a sense, I've already said something about that. Since we do have good relations in South Africa among the various communities, it's also important, and you see increasing signs of that, of many black people, for example, who cannot be mobilized by this corrupt government against Afrikaners who organize themselves. An increasing number of black people say, well, we actually understand Afrikaners. We understand why they do so. And we actually see that as a kind of an example. And what should be done is we should follow that example. And I think that is an extremely positive sign. What should Afrikaners' response to that be? What should the response of the entire citizenry of this whole region be to that? The response is that we should cooperate. We should not fall for the stratagems of this government to be in a position, and of people like Malema, to be in a situation of animosity towards each other. Yes, a recognition of our own communities, building, constructing, elevating, cultivating increasing numbers of, increasing amounts, increasing degrees of self-government, and also cooperating and assist one another. There are also excellent examples of things of that kind already happening. That is the basic building blocks of a new multiple constitutional order that is actually in a process of being established in this country now.
So we need to sort of round off the interview also, but a question that we often get, and you've in a certain sense answered it already, but I want to state the question explicitly, is people think of the idea of a changing constitutional order as something that happens by means of something like a kudesa. And so what we often get is people saying, yeah, we agree with what it is that you want to achieve, in other words, if you want to have a more sustainable constitutional dispensation, but it's not realistic because the ANC or those in power would never approve such a change. What's your response to that?
Ernst, I'm so glad that you are explicitly asked that question, because that is something which is so natural in my own mind that I actually failed to address it. There are a couple of sub-answers to that. In the first place, changing of the constitution takes place through human action, not through some kind, not necessarily at least through some kind of amendment, changing of the text of the constitution or changing of the text of legislation, which never gets effect anyway. Very often no effect is given to that. Changing of the constitution, changing of a constitutional order takes place in consequence of people acting in a different way and of cultivating the energies for people to act in a different way, in the way that I've just now, 2 minutes ago, tried to explain, communities and also mutual cooperation. Now then, the next point, which you specifically addressed in your question. Look, people speak about some kind of CODESA, some kind of national convention, some kind of national dialogue. It is something that I've already put so out of my own mind that I find references at the moment to a national dialogue as something like a joke. It's a travesty. I mean, the ANC is essentially a centralized and pro-totalitarian government with a strong Marxist streak. They're not interested in that. The only reason why they mention things like that is to defraud people. And you know, I've such sympathy even for Afrikaners who are so delighted about that. We are now going to sit down around a table and speak, not realizing that most probably it's never going to take place. And if it takes place, it's only speak for the sake of speaking. So, no, a new constitution, a new constitutional order can be made through that kind of process, but not necessarily. If you look through history, if you look at the way in which the Boer republics came about, if you look the way in which the Zulu Empire came about, was there some kind of national convention that somebody sit down and say, let's write a constitution, or at least let orally come to an agreement as to how it should be functioning? No, it was a kind of human action, and this is what I'm calling for. And so, no national convention needed. The permission of the African National Congress? No, not at all. In the first instance, a very, very important point that one should emphasize, and I did do it to a certain extent in our previous discussion, but you have an ANC government. Okay, at the moment they are in a multi-party government, but they still masquerade as if they are very strong. They are not. You have a weakening, an increasingly weakening ANC, who have simply less and less and less tools of governmental ability available to actually govern. They are less and less a nominal government and more and more a government only in name. As a result of which, they are simply not in a position to avoid the incremental development of a new multiple constitutional order, of a better South Africa. The best way to prove it is this: to a considerable extent, this kind of increasing self-determination, self-management of communities have already, to at least a particular, not that minimalist degree, has already come about, especially among the Afrikaners, but also among other communities. And also this phenomenon of people of various communities reaching out to one another is underway. It's taking place. We witness it every day, more and more. So what is this? It's a new constitutional order, multiple constitutional order, to emphasize that again, that is simply coming about regardless and specifically in the absence of the approval or the cooperation of the formal government, of the African National Congress. As we leave the old order, the old failing old order behind, we're actually also leaving the African National Congress and the government behind, in the sense that as far as in as much as they diminish more and more in power and authority, they are less and less relevant in the process of our various communities coming in touch with our resourcefulness, coming in touch with our power, authority, influence, and so on, building a new constitutional order regardless of the ANC still being involved in fictitious government, still being involved in corruption and so on. They are less and less a relevant factor. They are more and more irrelevant.
Professor Koos Malan, thank you very much. Again, there's much to be said about this topic further, and we'll have to get back to this as well, but thank you. So this concludes our three-part series, but it's not to say that we will not be getting back to these topics in the future. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you, my pleasure.
If you support this initiative and you want to contribute to the work that we are doing, I want to encourage you to click on the link in the description and to sign up as a contributor.